Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I wanted to begin going over some of the great information and insights that have come in through the comments section over the last several weeks. I also have a small Beach Boys surprise I'd like to share with you at the end of the episode. Before we get started, I wanted to thank Betamax Blocker once again for having me on his channel. I was on a few weeks ago and we went over the Beach Boys core catalog, making our nominations for the weirdest track on each Beach Boys album. This time we revisited that concept, going over live albums, collections, and archival releases. The first episode of a two-parter with me and Betamax Blocker is up on Betamax Blocker's channel now. He tells me the second part will come up next week sometime. Check it out. Think you'll enjoy it. He's got a lot of great content on that channel. Again, it's Betamax Blocker here on YouTube. To begin with, let's start with some unfortunate but necessary corrections to some of the information discussed in the 1969 episodes that just completed. In episode 230, U.S. Pop Culture 1969 Part 2, I mistakenly said that Blood, Sweat, and Tears was the band's debut album, when in fact it was their second album. And their first was 1968's Child is the Father to the Man album. Among those pointing that out were Anthony Kimball, Joel Goldenberg, and Beanie. I appreciate that they left me some wiggle room by pointing out that Blood, Sweat, and Tears was kind of a reboot of the band with David Clayton Thomas replacing Al Kooper, but honestly, I just messed it up. This was by any measure their second album, and thanks Anthony, Joel, and Beanie for pointing it out. Furthermore, Beanie said that in his opinion, Child is the Father to the Man is Blood, Sweat, and Tears' best album. I picked it up on his recommendation and I've really enjoyed it. The cover, with the band's heads superimposed on kids' bodies, is a little creepy. I'm guessing we can thank Al Kooper for that, as I'm now realizing he seemed to have a thing for superimposed heads on album covers. As for the music, I was surprised to realize that I was already familiar with the tracks I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know and I Can't Quit Her. Al Kooper is definitely the dominant force on this album, writing most of the songs and performing most of the lead vocals. Still, instrumentally, it's very recognizably a Blood, Sweat, and Tears album. With this album, I feel like I picked up on an important and enjoyable part of 60s pop rock history. Thanks, Beanie, for the recommendation. Also on episode 230, Beanie passed along a hilarious anecdote about seeing a production of the musical Hair in Canton, Ohio in 1971. He tells it much better than I ever could. If you missed it, you might want to go back to 230 and read his account of that in the comments. It's very, very entertaining. Also, along the same lines as the Blood, Sweat, and Tears album, Rich Moore and Simple Chronology reminded me that when I said Grand Funk Railroad's first album was Grand Funk, I was forgetting the On Time album released in August 1969. Thanks for catching that, and based on my recent track record, you can bet I'll be double and triple checking before I say anything is anybody's first album here again. Also on the mistakes front, when we talked about the 2020 album, I said that it was the first original Beach Boys studio album to feature a gatefold sleeve. I specified studio album because I remembered that the concert album also had a gatefold. Ted's Got Rhythm pointed out that I forgot about the Beach Boys Party album's gatefold sleeve. I don't know why I omitted that. Good catch, Ted, and once again, thanks for pointing it out. Moving on to other people's mistakes, Nathan, who goes by Maximum NPP here on YouTube, let me know that the B-side of the UK version of the I Can Hear Music single, All I Want to Do, is credited to Dave Wilson, which I thought was pretty interesting. Something I overlooked and really shouldn't have in discussing pop culture events in 1969 was Elvis Presley's return to the concert stage at the new International Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas on July 31st, 1969. His residency will run for 57 shows and end on August 28th. It's his first time on a concert stage since 1961. The concerts get rave reviews and add momentum to his recent career resurgence. I want to thank viewer LW for reminding me of that. We certainly should have covered it when we discussed the summer of 1969. The performances on the From Memphis to Vegas album, which, as mentioned, were part of the double set released in November, were drawn from those shows. Paul G. let me know about another musical event from the summer of 1969 that was going on virtually at the same time that Elvis was making his return to the concert stage. On August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, Paul was one of over 100,000 concert goers at the Atlantic City Pop Festival at the Atlantic City Racetrack. The festival featured an amazing array of talent, including some of those who would turn in landmark performances at Woodstock 2 weeks later, like Joe Cocker, Janis Joplin, Jefferson Airplane, Santana, and Creedence Clearwater Revival. Crosby, Stills, and Nash were scheduled but bowed out due to Graham Nash having trouble with his voice. Also included, among many others, were Chicago Transit Authority, the Mothers of Invention, Tim Buckley, the Byrds, and Joni Mitchell, who abruptly cut her set short and left the stage complaining that no one was paying attention to her set. Little Richard closed out the three-day festival, reportedly turning in an electrifying performance. From what I've read since getting Paul's comments, it sounds as if the festival was peaceful and better organized, more comfortable, and had better weather than Woodstock. Admission to the three-day festival was $15. Paul also related that shortly before Creedence came on, the crowd surged out of the grandstand toward the stage. Paul and two friends jumped a fence, and Paul was able to watch CCR's set 2 or 3 rows deep right in front of John Fogerty. There were a lot of great rock festivals all around the country in 1969, featuring a wide array of now legendary talent. Even in a year like that, the Atlantic City Pop Festival sounds outstanding. Thanks, Paul, for sharing those memories and for reminding us of a festival that I think would loom larger in pop culture history had it not been upstaged by Woodstock 2 weeks later. Also in that episode, number 232, I talked about the seemingly pointless 1969 Capitol release, The Beach Boys Close Up. What I didn't know, and what I learned from comments from George Heehan, is that it was just one part of a big series of double album reissues that Capitol was doing at the time for many of their major artists. There were close-up albums for Lou Rawls, Nancy Wilson, The Letterman, Sonny James, Merle Haggard, Buck Owens, Jackie Gleason, Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, and probably others. They all had the same title and the same basic artwork inside and out. I'm guessing it was a cheap and easy way for Capitol to get some of their back catalog back into stores. Whatever the thinking was, it clearly wasn't designed specifically for the Beach Boys. Thanks, George, for letting me know about that. The last time I did Cool Stuff episodes, back in numbers 223 and 224, I went on the road in Southern California visiting historic Beach Boys sites. Since then, it occurred to me that there are a couple of historic Beach Boys sites right here in my hometown of Ann Arbor, Michigan. With the great summer weather we're currently having in this part of the world, I figured it was a good time to get out of the basement, get out in the sunshine, and show you those historic sites. I'm standing outside Hill Auditorium on the University of Michigan campus, and this is the site of the first Beach Boys live performance of Good Vibrations on October 22nd, 1966. Now, in the fall of 1966, Good Vibrations was not going to be easy to reproduce on stage. Brian and his friend Michael Voss flew in so that Brian could put the band through a day-long rehearsal at Hill and check the sound to make sure it was going to come across properly. At some point, Brian reportedly took time to play excerpts from the upcoming Smile album for reporter Lorraine Alterman of the Detroit Free Press on piano. There were 2 shows on October 22nd, one at 6 p.m. and one at 8 p.m. Brian was apparently pleased and joined the group on stage for the encore of the second show, Johnny Be Good. He received a standing ovation. The next day, the group flew out for a European tour. Brian and Michael Voss returned to L.A. During the flight, they got the crew to allow them to make an in-flight phone call, which was unusual in those days. Brian contacted Marilyn and had her call up a bunch of his closest friends to greet him when the flight arrived at LAX. When they landed, Brian had photographer Guy Webster take pictures of the group in the airport terminal, one of which famously Brian had enlarged and hung in his living room. Various Beach Boy biographies have noted that Brian soon fell out of contact with many of those in the photo. The Hill Auditorium performances were released on December 9th, 2016 on the digital copyright protection download Graduation Day Live 1966. I was only 6 when those concerts took place, so though I was in town, I missed out. Over the years, I've seen concerts here by Elton John, Devo, Elvis Costello, and a lot of others. Most recently, just before the pandemic, I saw Bob Dylan at Hill Auditorium. Let's move on to another Beach Boys historic site. To give you an idea how close these two sites are to each other, I'm going to film the walk over there. It takes about a minute. I'll speed it up a little bit. Hope you enjoy it. So, I'm now standing outside the Michigan Theater, which is just off the University of Michigan campus on Liberty Street. When the theater opened in 1928, it was the city's finest venue for movies and stage shows. In 1928, the transition was on from silent movies to sound, and the Michigan Theater opened with a magnificent Barton pipe organ, which is still in use today. In fact, just this week, I saw Harold Lloyd's 1928 film Speedy with live organ accompaniment here at the Michigan. The Michigan began hosting rock shows in the mid-'80s. One of the first I recall was REM. I wasn't able to go to that show. Just about everybody I talked to said that REM was good, but that the sound in the auditorium was miserable. There were a lot of complaints about the sound in those early days, but they seem to have had it all worked out long before Brian Wilson played the first gig of his first solo tour here on March 9th, 1999. David Leaf describes the historic Ann Arbor show and the events leading up to it on pages 380 and 381 of God Only Knows, Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth. It also came up in my discussion with David Leaf on this channel back in episodes 139 and 140. Basically, he recalls going out in a snowstorm with a friend in search of milk for Brian's baby daughter, Daria. They passed the theater and seeing An Evening with Brian Wilson on the marquee, thought how surreal it was that Brian was finally touring solo. David also worried that it could still all go horribly wrong. Of course, by all reports, it went great. The musicians and the performance were excellent. Brian seemed to enjoy himself, and as David Leaf put it, Brian made it look as if he'd been headlining concerts his whole life. The Michigan Theater has been extensively restored and renovated since 1999. The 1950s marquee has been replaced by this one, which is more in keeping with the 1928 original. I was living in LA in 1999. I didn't get to see the Brian show here. I did get to see him when he returned to the Michigan Theater in 2004 with Brian Wilson Presents Smile, which was a fantastic show. I also saw the Mike and Bruce Christmas show here promoting Reason for the Season in 2018. Hope you enjoyed a look at these two minor but interesting, I hope, Beach Boys historic sites in Ann Arbor, Michigan. David Leaf also shared his memories of the Ann Arbor concert in his opening essay to Brian's 1999 tour book. I'll give you a look at this just in case you've never seen it. There's the essay, a little testimonial from Billy Corgan, very timely in 1999, I guess. Some photos of Brian on stage. Japan, summer 1999. This must have come out quite late in the year, I guess. Photos of the band. More of Brian. Some credits. Picture of Brian with Melinda. And some early family photos, for some reason titled Lay Down Burden. I'm not sure why they used that there specifically. And that's it, and a little bit of hometown pride. The very first words in this Brian Wilson tour book. Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's all we have time for this time. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate all the great info and all the great comments. We'll carry on next time, concentrating particularly on comments and feedback on the 2020 album and on Breakaway. Meanwhile, look forward to your comments on this. Have a great week. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.